regions of the country. The other third variable that we use for the computation of consumer price index and rate of inflation is the importance, otherwise termed as the weight that people place on the 307 items. So during our Living Standard Survey, in this case, the Living Standard Survey that was done in 2017-2018, we identified 307 items that persons in Ghana place different importance on them, and that is the variable that we add to the data on prices and quantities that we collect on a monthly basis for the computation of consumer price index and rate of inflation. We did a last rebasing in 2018 to reflect the change in the structure of the economy. However, following the reconstruction of our administration regions from 10 to 16 administrative regions, we readjusted the weight in 2021 to reflect the 6 additional regions that we have as a country. So since September last year, we've been able to release rate of inflation and consumer price indices for all our 16 administrative regions. Prices are collected from 57 markets, and within these 57 markets, we've identified 8,337 outlets, and from these 8,337 outlets, prices collected on 47,877 products. These 47,877 products reflect the different brands that we have of the 307 items that we have in our basket. In all our 307 items, we have the respective weight associated to it, which sums up to 100%. For purposes of calculating inflation consumer price index for each of these single items, we've ordered these items in a hierarchy, starting from 13 divisions through to 44 groups, 98 classes, 156 subclasses, and 307 items. These classifications are ordered in a hierarchy that is mutually exclusive to enable us to independently calculate the consumer price index and rate of inflation for each of these 307 items. For emphasis, we do not calculate the inflation for the 47,877 items because we do not have weight across the different brands of a particular item. Consumer price index and rate of inflation for the month of May 2023. For the month of May 2023, consumer price index stood at 178.7 relative to 125.7 that was recorded for the same time period in May 2022. Given these two indices, that is 178.7 for the month of May 2023 and 125.7 for the month of May 2022, the relative change in these two price indices culminates in a rate of inflation of 42.2% for the month of May 2023. 42.2% for the month of May 2023 means that between the month of May 2022 and May 2023, over that 1 year period, generally prices of goods and services have gone up by 42.2%. Annual rate of inflation for the month of May 2023 stood at 42.2% for May 2023. This compares with 41.2% that was recorded for April 2023. So on a year-on-year basis, between April 2023 and May 2023, we see a 1.0 percentage point in the rate of inflation. On a month-on-month basis, that is between April 2023 and May 2023, the consumer price index for April 2023 stood at 170.5 indices relative to 178.7 that was recorded in May 2023. Comparing these two indices, the relative change between these two indices culminates in a rate of inflation of 4.8, that is a monthly rate of inflation for May 2023 of 4.8%. This compares to 2.4 that was recorded for April 2023. And therefore, we conclude that on a month-on-month basis, we've seen a doubling of the monthly rate of inflation between April 2023 and May 2023. We look at the year-on-year inflation and the month-on-month inflation from a trend perspective. It will be recalled that in December 2022, Ghana had its highest rate of inflation, which stood at 54.1%. At the beginning of the year, since January 2023, we've seen a slowdown in the rate of inflation consistently for the last 4 months up to April 2023. This slowdown in the rate of inflation has been reversed with a 1.0 percentage point increase that we have recorded in the month April and May 2023. So we saw a consistent slowdown in the rate of inflation between January and April 2023, and this slowdown in the rate of inflation has been reversed in the month of May 2023. On a month-on-month basis, we saw its peak in the month of November 2022, that is over the last 13 months. We recorded a peak in monthly inflation of 8.6%. This consistently dropped to a deflation which was recorded in March 2023 of 1.2%. The deflation was reversed in April 2023 to 2.4%, and this deflation that was reversed has been consolidated with a much higher increase in month-on-month inflation of 4.8% for the month of May 2023. We do disaggregations at the two major levels, that is food and non-food inflation, and also from a locally produced item and an imported item perspective. It is important to recognize the weight associated to food inflation, which is 43.7%, relative to non-food inflation, which is 56.3%. So food and non-alcoholic beverages contribute about 2/5 of the importance that we put on goods and services that we consume in Ghana. In the month of May 2023, food inflation stood at 51.8%, relative to non-food inflation 34.6%. The percentage point difference between food inflation year-on-year and non-food inflation year-on-year stood at 17.2 percentage points between food and non-food inflation for the month of May 2023. This variation that we are recording for food and non-food inflation has widened by about 4.1 percentage point, as we recorded a 13.3 percentage point difference between last month's food inflation, which was 48.7% relative to 35.4%, which was recorded for April 2023. On a month-on-month basis, disaggregating from a food and non-food perspective, we realize a difference of 2.5 percentage points, as month-on-month food inflation stood at 6.2% and non-food inflation month-on-month stood at 3.5% for the month of May 2023. From a locally produced item and an imported item perspective, we continue to see the dominance of imported items, inflation related to imported items, with a rate of inflation of 43.8% for the month of May 2023 relative to 36.2% for locally produced items for May 2023. This difference is 7.6% between locally produced items and imported items for the month of May 2023. Further disaggregation is done at a 13 division point. It would be recalled that we indicated in the introduction that the 307 items are ordered in a hierarchy, starting from 13 divisions through to 44 groups, 156 subclasses, and the 307 items. Of the 13 divisions, we identified 4 divisions that recorded rates of inflation higher than the national rate of inflation. Specifically, this was led by furnishing and household equipment, 57.8%, housing, water, electricity, and gas, 54.0%, personal care, social protection, 53.4%, and food and non-alcoholic beverages, 51.8%. All 4 divisions recorded rates of inflation higher than the national rate of inflation. On a month-on-month basis, keeping in mind that the national month-on-month rate of inflation was 4.8 for the month of May 2023, we again identified 5 divisions that recorded rates of inflation higher than the national average. This was led by personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous items that recorded the highest divisional month-on-month inflation of 7.0%. We turn away from the levels of inflation and from the 13 divisions point of view, identify the divisions that are contributing the most to the rate of inflation that was recorded for the month of May 2023. Across the 13 divisions, top 3 items, namely food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing, water, electricity and gas, and transport, almost contributed 3/4 to the overall inflation, with food and non-alcoholic beverages contributing more than 50% to the rate of inflation that was recorded in May 2023. Specifically, food and non-alcoholic beverages contributed 52.4% to the overall inflation recorded in the month of May 2023. This was distantly followed by housing, water, electricity, and gas that contributed 13.1%, and closely followed by transport, contributing 9.2% to the overall inflation that was recorded in the month of May 2023. The division that contributed the lowest to inflation in May 2023 was insurance and financial services, that contributed 0.1 to the overall inflation for May 2023. We turn to the food inflation, given its dominance in terms of its contribution to the overall inflation. It will be recalled that food inflation contributes, the weight of food inflation is 43.7% to the overall rate of inflation. So we look at the trends in the levels of rate of inflation and the share of food inflation to the overall inflation. Since January 2022, it peaked in January 2023 with a rate of inflation of 61.0%. This is more than 3 times the rate of food inflation which was recorded in January 2022. In January 2022, food inflation stood at 13.7%, and the peak was 61.0% for January 2023. Since January 2023 to April 2023, we saw a continuous slowdown in food inflation, decreasing through 59.1%, 50.0% to 48.7%, which was recorded for April 2023. The decline in food inflation was reversed in May 2023 with an upward increase up to 51.8% for food inflation for May 2023. In terms of the contribution, the share of food inflation to overall inflation, we have recorded the highest contribution in the last 17 months, that is from January 2022 to May 2023. In January 2022, the contribution of food inflation to overall inflation was 43.4%. It increased up to half in terms of its share to 50.5% in May, stayed around that until April 2023, which we again recorded 50.9%, but we see its contribution in May 2023 inching up by 2.0 percentage points from 50.9% in May 2023 to 52.9% in May 2023, leading to it being the highest contribution of food inflation in the last 17 months. We focus again on food inflation on a year-on-year basis and on a month-on-month basis, and identify the subclasses within the food division that are contributing to year-on-year food inflation and month-on-month food inflation. Year-on-year food inflation from both year-on-year food inflation and month-on-month food inflation are driven by tea and related products, which respectively recorded rate of inflation of 114.8% year-on-year and 19.4% month-on-month, relative to the overall food inflation year-on-year 51.8% and month-on-month 6.2%. We turn to the regional rates of inflation for May 2023, and across the 2 broad categorizations of rate of inflation, that is food inflation and non-food inflation. We see the dominance of Western North inflation with a food inflation of 77.1% for the month of May 2023 and a non-food inflation of 44.6% for the month of May 2023. These high rates of inflation for the Western North region contributed to the region's overall lead in inflation of 62.5% for the month of May 2023. The region that recorded the least rate of inflation for the month of May 2023 was Ashanti region, which recorded a rate of 31.0%. The difference between the region with the highest rate of inflation and the region with the lowest rate of inflation, which is Ashanti region, 31.0%, is more than 2 times. We focus on the regions and look at their contribution across the 16 administrative regions. Across the 16 administrative regions, the weight of Greater Accra is about 28.5%, and the other 15 administrative regions take the remaining percent in terms of their contribution. From a contribution point of view, for the month of May 2023, Greater Accra region contributed close to a quarter of the overall inflation that was recorded in May 2023, specifically 24.6% for May 2023. This was for Ashanti and Eastern region, contributing respectively 17.2% and 12.6% for the month of May 2023. The overall inflation that was recorded in May 2023. We look at the shares of the Greater Accra region to overall inflation, and we are focusing on Greater Accra region given the highest weight that it brings to fall in computing consumer price index and rate of inflation. In the last 17 months, we are seeing the lowest contribution from Greater Accra, specifically Greater Accra contributing 24.6%. The contribution of Greater Accra peaked in the month of October 2022 and also August 2022 with respective rates of 35.10 and 35.0 for August and October 2023. Consistently since October, this contribution of the Greater Accra region has declined up to 24.6% for the month of May 2023. In the context of the region that recorded the overall highest rate of inflation and also the overall highest food inflation, we seek for the drivers that led to the overall rate of inflation in the Western North region and the overall food inflation again in the Western North region. From the overall rate of inflation point of view, we narrow down on the 13 divisions, keeping in mind that the Western North region recorded a rate of 62.5% as overall rate of inflation. Food and non-alcoholic beverages had the highest rate of inflation of 77.1%, followed by furnishing, household equipment 74.4%, and the other two divisions that recorded rates of inflation higher than the overall inflation of 62.5% were information and communication and recreation, sports and culture. We focus on food inflation in the Western North region, and the driver for the 77.1 food inflation that was recorded for the Western North region was fruit and nuts that recorded a rate of change of 157.0%, followed by tea and other products 102.4%. So these are the two subclasses within the food division that led to the high rate of inflation recorded in the Western North region. We turn to the highlights for the May 2023 rate of inflation. For the month of May 2023, rate of inflation stood at 42.2%, indicating a 1.0 upward increase in the rate of inflation between April 2023 and May 2023. In April 2023, the rate of inflation from January followed a consistent decline up to 41.2%, and this decline was reversed, that is, the slowdown inflation was reversed in the month of May 2023 with an upward increase from 41.2% to 42.2%. From a regional perspective, the Western North region recorded the highest rate of inflation of 62.2%, and the Ashanti region recorded the lowest rate of inflation of 31.0%, indicating about twice the difference between the region that recorded the highest rate, Western North region, and the region that recorded the lowest rate, Ashanti region. From a food and non-food perspective, we have for the first time in several months recorded a very high variation between food and non-food inflation, with food inflation standing at 51.8% for the month of May 2023, non-6% for the month of May 2023. We see an upward increase in food inflation from 48.7% that was recorded in April 2023 to 51.8% for May 2023. Contrary to that, we see a decline in non-food inflation. In April 2023, non-food inflation stood at 35.4%, and this has 0.8 percentage points in May 2023. From a locally produced item and an imported item, we see a variation of 7.6 percentage points, with the dominance of inflation on imported items 43.8% for the month of May 2023 relative to 36.2% for inflation on locally produced items, 36.2%. On a month-on-month basis, we've seen a doubling of the month-on-month inflation. Month-on-month inflation for April 2023 stood at 2.4%, and in the month of May 2023, month-on-month inflation was 4.8%. From a food inflation and a non-food inflation, on a monthly basis, we've seen a variation of 2.7%, as food inflation stood at 6.2% relative to non-food inflation 3.5%. We end today's release with issues for wider engagement for policy consideration that recorded rate of inflation higher than 42.2%. That is, across the 307 items that we have in the basket, 143 of them recorded changes in prices that were higher than 42.2%. These 143 items were predominantly non-food imported items, which was 54 out of the 143 items, constituting 37.8%, and followed by local food, which was 50 out of the 143 items, culminating in a 35% of the 143 items that recorded prices higher than the 40% overall inflation for Ghana for May 2023. We identify at the regional level regions that have consistently recorded the highest prices in the last since September 2022. And the Western North region since September 2022 has recorded 4 times the highest food inflation, specifically from February to May 2023. We've got a Western North region dominating food inflation from 77.3%, inching up to 81.1%, dropped 0.3% in April 2023, and then slow down again to 77.1% for May 2023. The other region that contributed to the highest food inflation for the last since September 2022 was the Central region. In September 2022, the Central region recorded an inflation of 50.3%, October 57.9%, and November 71.7%. So it could be said that in the last 9 months, the Central region and the Western region have dominated in terms of food inflation. We compute the regional variations in inflation since September 2022 and identify the regions that have recorded the highest percentage point change since September 2022 and May 2023. And also we look at the year-on-year changes over the last month since September 2022. Since September 2022, the Western North region recorded the highest percentage point as it increased in September from 35.9 to 62.5%, which culminates in 26.6 percentage points for the Western North region. Contrary to 4 regions recording changes in excess of 20 percentage points, the Greater Accra region recorded a downward trend between September 2022 and May 2023, with a percentage point drop of 12% between September 2022 and May 2023. Thank you very much.
Please, shall we do it better for Prof. Samuel Kobina Enim? Thank you so much, sir, for that powerful presentation. Please, we have some questions and answers, specifically from the Ghana Statistical Services.
That was a very comprehensive.
Yes, please, from the media. Okay, so please, ongoing is the distribution of the presentation that was just given to us. We should all kindly go through whilst we prepare for the questioning.
I need to buy my teleprompter and walk around with it. I couldn't see anything.
Full of the food. Help us with the answering. All right, sir.